So this case happened when I was a little bit too young to remember, but it's one of those cases that I have seen pop up time and time again over the years. And recently I stumbled upon it once again. I saw the very memorable photo of Daniel holding up his cat pop up on my Facebook. And this is the image of him that has always stuck in my head. Not only because I love cats, but because this boy, Daniel, who was just 19 years old, I think has this certain warmth and sweetness to his face, if that makes sense. So this led me to look up his case to see what was going on with it. And first off, I couldn't believe that it had been 27 years since he disappeared. But I also saw that there had been one small development back in 2018, and this prompted me to want to discuss this case here with you guys. So hopefully with the little platform that we have here, we can push this baffling case back into the spotlight and get some fresh eyes on it, because you never know who may be watching or listening. So today's case starts on December 31, 1994, a Saturday, and of course, New Year's Eve in Adelaide, Australia. 19-year-old Daniel Sheppard and his twin brother, Michael, are making plans to head out to popular nightclub Lenny's Tavern in Glenelg along with a few of their friends. But I do want to talk a little bit more about Daniel and Michael before moving on. As I said, they were twins, although not identical, and like many twins, the pair were incredibly close. Born on July 4, 1975, the pair were raised in the suburb of Westlakes in Adelaide by their mother Patricia and father, who unfortunately did pass away when the boys were just 15 years old. Daniel and Michael also have 5 older sisters. However, they were significantly older than the boys and they didn't live at home when they were growing up. And the only child in me can actually not comprehend what growing up with 5 older sisters would have been like, but I feel like it would have been a pretty cool experience. Despite the fact that the Sheppard family did not have a lot of money, Michael did state that their home life was, quote, peaceful, which counted for a lot, end quote. And by all accounts, it sounds like the boys had a really happy childhood. Together, the twins enjoyed riding their bikes, fishing, swimming in their local lake, and they also loved going to watch a game of footy down at Alberton Oval. Sorry, I'm not very familiar with Adelaide. I've only been once. And Daniel was a massive supporter of Port Adelaide. Those close to Daniel described him as loyal, kind-hearted and reliable. And his brother described him as a bit of a larrikin, calling him a top bloke in one interview and adding that he was very friendly and would talk to anyone. A larrikin, by the way, I believe is a predominantly Aussie term, which basically means you're a bit of a jokester or a prankster. And of course, like many teens in the mid-1990s, Daniel was a huge fan of grunge bands Pearl Jam and Silverchair. And looking at photos of Daniel, I almost feel like his personal style kind of reflected this. It's quite reminiscent of Kurt Cobain or Daniel Johns of Silverchair. Side note, Nirvana is my favourite band of all time. Like, I have loved them for over half my life. I also do love Pearl Jam and early Silverchair, so I must say Daniel had excellent taste in music. At 18 years old, Daniel and Michael, who were still living with their mum in Westlakes, got full-time jobs. Daniel worked at a powder coating factory and Michael got a job producing metal parts. And by all accounts, Daniel was really well liked at his job, with one workmate describing Daniel as, quote, a good laugh and a funny bloke to be with. So from what I can tell, working full-time jobs was kind of the boys' first real taste of financial freedom. In Australia, 18 years old is also the first year that you are out of the school system and the first age where we can drink and vote and do all of those fun adult things that we have been waiting to do. So it's an exciting year. So the two boys weren't really making that much money at their jobs, just enough to get by and have some fun on their days off, which really at that age is all you need. Daniel really was just this happy, funny, good kid from what I can tell, only just starting out in life, which is what makes this story even more tragic. And this brings us back to New Year's Eve of 1994. Between 6 and 7 p.m. that evening, Daniel and Michael head out for the night. Daniel is wearing blue jeans and a maroon denim shirt. And the boys' first stop that night is at a friend's house in the suburb of Cheltenham. Oh boy, I'm really bad at these pronunciations. I'll have all the names I can't pronounce on the screen. Cheltenham, I think that's correct. Where they meet up with friends for pre-drinks. At around 8 p.m, the group of friends catch a train into the city, and from there they hop on a tram down to Glenelg, where they head to Lenny's Tavern. The group bring in the new year at Lenny's before heading their separate ways. So at around 1:30 a.m, Daniel, Michael and their friends Ben Silvani and his girlfriend Desiree Layton catch a tram back into the city centre, and at this point, Michael decides to split from the group and carry on the night's festivities without them. A few articles actually did state that Michael headed home at this point, but in an interview with Michael, he does directly state that he got on a train at 5:30 a.m. So I can only assume that Michael continued on the New Year's celebrations elsewhere that night. In the city, Daniel, Ben and Desiree head to Rave nightclub on Hindley Street before carrying on to a place called Empire, although some articles did call it Liberty nightclub, so I'm not sure if the place was renamed or changed owners or rebranded, but either way, Empire was just a few minutes away on Rose Street. At around 3 a.m, Ben and Desiree decide it's time to call it a night and they head off. But Daniel decides that he wants to kick on for just a little bit longer. And he stays at Empire, where he chats with a woman named Pamela Tanner. Pamela, who does later chat with the police, says that the last time she saw Daniel was around 4 a.m. that morning. So after leaving Empire by himself, Daniel makes the short walk to the train station to catch the train home to Westlakes. At the train station, Daniel runs into 4 people that he went to school with. Eliza Nowak, Amy McNeil, Nicole Slabsky, I'm going to really have that one on the screen for you, I'm not too sure, and Nicholas Wright, who are, like Daniel, all waiting for the Adelaide to Outer Harbour train service. At 4:13 a.m, the train arrives and the group hop on, with there being about 30 odd punters also on the train that morning. At this point, Daniel is described as being moderately intoxicated but is still perfectly capable of walking, talking, and is generally aware of what is going on around him. During the ride home, Daniel chats with the 3 girls, telling them, "I'm partied out, I'm going home to crash." And this statement is our best indication that Daniel had intended to head straight home from the train. The 3 girls hop off at the train stop right before Daniel in Alberton, and a few minutes later, at 4:35 a.m, Daniel waves goodbye to Nicholas, who is still on the train, before getting off at platform 5 in Port Adelaide. From there, he begins his short walk home to Westlakes, a walk that should have taken him just 10 minutes, but Daniel would never make it home that night. I did actually look at a map and it seems like this walk is closer to 20 minutes, but I'm guessing that Daniel was a quick walker and probably knew all the shortcuts. Plus, there might be buildings there now that were not there 27 years ago. And the last time Daniel was officially seen that morning is when he was leaving the train station on the southern pedestrian ramp and heading in the direction of Baines Place. And I will pop a map up on the screen for context. And not long after this, Daniel's brother Michael hops on the same train service at 5:30 a.m, the train that was right after Daniel's, and he makes it home safely. The next day, Michael was the first to notice that Daniel had not arrived home from the night before, and at first he assumed that Daniel had just crashed at a mate's place, so he gave them a ring to ease his mind, but Daniel was not there. Michael and his mum rang around to a few more of Daniel's friends, only to be told that he had informed several friends of his plans to head back home that night. And Michael and his mum knew just how out of character this was for Daniel to go missing or make a sudden change of plans, so they were very quick to report him missing to the police. And an investigation soon does begin, which involves police searching the area of his last known location, so around Port Adelaide, as well as local rivers, but not a shred of evidence is found. And quite frankly, police were at a loss. And Daniel's case actually does very much remind me of the Bung Siraboon case I covered quite a while back. So in 2013, 13-year-old Bung was making the short walk from her house to school when, in broad daylight, she disappears into thin air, never to be seen again, and not a shred of evidence is left behind, as though she had just evaporated. Very similar to Daniel's story. And it's even believed that Bung made it as far as her school's gate, and even though she was surrounded by suburban houses, no one saw or heard a thing. It's a case I do often think about, and I hope that one day that Bung's family receives the answers as to what happened to Bung on that day. Anyway, as with every investigation, the police interviewed friends, family, acquaintances, and anyone that interacted with Daniel the night and morning that he disappeared. And by all accounts, Daniel had no enemies, no reason to disappear, and everything about him and his behaviour that night was totally normal. I should also add that Daniel had no history of mental illness, depression, or running away, at least to the best of my knowledge. There was one sighting of Daniel between 6:30 and 7 a.m. on New Year's morning at Grand Junction Road in Rosewater, which, looking at a map, appears to be a 20-ish minute walk from the Port Adelaide train stop, but this sighting has never been confirmed, nor do the family believe that this was actually him. And Daniel's family have actually publicly stated that in regards to this sighting, while they do appreciate the tip, they do not believe that Daniel would have made a last-minute change of plans after getting off the train. And to add a personal thought to this, I feel like very few people, after a long, exhausting night out of drinking and partying, when they are just 10 minutes from home and bed, would make a very sudden change of plans and go elsewhere. Several weeks after Daniel disappeared, his brother Michael took part in a reenactment in an effort to up the media attention. He popped on a blonde wig and the same blue jeans and maroon denim shirt that Daniel wore on New Year's Eve and retraced his brother's last known movements for the cameras. This reenactment aired on television and did bring in a number of tips and theories as to what happened to Daniel. So this was a case that I noticed happened to have a lot of theories, as many unsolved cases do, of course, although it seemed that most of the theories in this case have been disproven or discounted, so I don't want to spend too long discussing or dwelling on them, but let's just go through a few of them. One tip-off did suggest that Daniel had interrupted a break-in at the local rugby club, leading to him being beaten to death. However, there is absolutely no proof of this. Another caller believed that Daniel may have been killed over drug debt, and in fact claimed to hear or overhear a drug dealer admitting that Daniel had been buried in their backyard. But when police actually went to this particular home with ground penetrating radars, nothing was found. There was even tip-offs to suggest that the occult was involved in Daniel's disappearance, which again is backed up with absolutely zero evidence. Police also did raid the home of a local known sex offender after a tip-off claiming that Daniel was seen there, but again, nothing came of this. The possibility that an accident had happened when Daniel was walking home was of course also considered, but as I mentioned, the local rivers were searched and nothing was found. The only potential accident that I really could think could have possibly happened is if a drunk driver had hit Daniel, given that it was New Year's morning and that person or persons involved decided to cover up the crime and the crime scene and destroy any evidence. But again, there is literally no proof of this happening. I should also add that in relation to any drug theories, of which there seem to be quite a few in this case, his family have publicly stated that although Daniel did occasionally use marijuana, he did not take nor deal any other drugs, and as far as I'm aware, nobody has ever come forward that personally knew Daniel and stated otherwise. I have noticed over the years that when it comes to a missing person's case, particularly a male, there is almost always at least one drug theory of some kind. For example, Zach Barnes, a fairly well-known missing persons case here in Australia, was littered with drug theories. And in fact, Zach's case is also quite similar to Daniel's. Zach was just 18 when he disappeared, although his case is a little more complicated as to who was involved and what happened. And fun fact, Zach Barnes was actually the first true crime case that I ever covered back on my old channel in 2018. And I can hardly believe I've been talking about true crime on the internet for almost 5 years, but here we are. I also did see a while back that Danielle Hallen covered Zach's case, but the video disappeared about a week later, so I'm not sure what happened there. But I will tell you, I have never had more messages about a case than that one. Even years after I uploaded that video, I was receiving messages from people that knew someone who knew someone who knew Zach, and they had a theory on what happened. So I'm thinking that somebody out there definitely knows something. That's all I'm saying. My video also is not public anymore, so don't go looking for it. Anyway, I am going to discuss one or two more likely theories in Daniel's case towards the end of this video, but I just wanted to get the less probable ones out of the way. So 2 years after Daniel went missing in 1997, there was a potential sighting of Daniel at the Norwood Hotel in Norwood, and the police were immediately contacted and actually went down to the place and shut it down. But when they went to look for this person thought to be Daniel, he was nowhere to be seen. In 2005, a coroner did actually find that Daniel Sheppard was deceased, but a cause of death could not be determined. And this conclusion was reached because Daniel's bank accounts had remained untouched since he disappeared, and he also had made no effort to reach out to his family, whom he had been very close with. Interestingly, and a not so dissimilar case happened just before the inquest that I suspect many of you, both Aussies and non-Aussies, may be familiar with, and that is the abduction and murder of Daniel Morecambe. Daniel Morecambe was also a twin who was just 13 years old when he vanished, waiting for a bus one afternoon in broad daylight. 8 years later, a man was arrested and Daniel's remains were located. He had been abducted and murdered at random in a case of wrong place, wrong time. It's actually an incredibly interesting story that has been covered by several other channels here on YouTube if you are interested on hearing the full story. I know from memory Georgia Marie covered it really well, but other than that, not too sure. So I am sure you may have picked up on some of the similarities between Daniel Sheppard's case and Daniel Morecambe's case. And I only really bring it up because I saw several articles comparing the two cases, but also I found it incredibly interesting how one case, the Daniel Morecambe case, received so much media attention and the other received so little, and yet they're so similar. Which of course is one of the reasons why I wanted to discuss Daniel Sheppard's case today on the channel. I just thought the comparison was worth a bit of a mention, as I do tend to like discussing how the media portrays a case and consumes a case and discusses a case when I'm doing these videos. Just a bit of food for thought. So I mentioned at the beginning of this video that there had been a recent-ish development. In 2018, a nurse named Carol reached out to the Sheppard family via their Facebook page for Daniel and told them some startling information. Carol told them that on the morning Daniel went missing at around 4:45 a.m, which was just 10 minutes after Daniel got off the train, she was awake and tending to her sick daughter when she heard a commotion going on outside in her street. Carol, who lived on Jane Flaxman Court, which was very close to where Daniel lived, rushed outside to see what all this fuss was about. And down the street, she heard a distressed person shouting, "I don't need a lift, fuck off, fuck off," and saw a large square-shaped car comparable to a Holden Statesman or Ford Falcon with its headlights off, and a male in the passenger seat and what she thought looked like a female in the middle back seat. Shortly after the incident, Carol informed her husband of what she had witnessed, but he brushed her off, telling her it was just the kind of stuff that happened on New Year's morning. Carol was unable to brush off this uneasy feeling that she had, so she made the decision to report the incident to the police later that day. Although Carol never heard anything back and didn't think to follow it up until she heard about missing boy Daniel Sheppard. Thinking that maybe she witnessed his abduction, Carol reached out once again to the police to remind them of the report that she had put in on New Year's Day. Unfortunately, once again, the police didn't show much interest in what Carol had to say, only speaking with her briefly about what she saw over the phone. So not only did Carol report this incident before even knowing about what happened to Daniel, but the time and location of the incident that she witnessed pretty much matches up perfectly with Daniel's timeline. But despite this, Carol did not hear from the police again up until the early 2000s, when they gave her a call to ask her about what she had witnessed, just when she thought her statement was finally being taken seriously. She was completely ignored during the 2005 inquest. In 2018, after spending years considering doing it, Carol finally reached out to the Sheppard family. And the Sheppards were wary of Carol's claims at first, but when they reached out to the police to ask them about this story Carol told them, the police confirmed what Carol said. I should also add that after all of these years, Carol never wavered in her version of events, adding more validity to her statement. And as you can imagine, the Sheppards were flabbergasted to discover this valuable new piece of information after such a long time. After all, what Carol witnessed could have been used as an incredibly important piece of evidence in solving Daniel's case. But not only did the police dismiss what she had to say, they didn't even bother to pass it on to Daniel's family. And furthermore, the police didn't even have any real explanation as to why this even happened. And it really was the kind of evidence that would have been the most valuable when it was fresh. It could have triggered a memory for someone that saw something, but so many years have passed since then, so it's almost impossible to effectively use this new information now. Of course, people's memories have faded, people have passed on, and of course, Daniel's story is no longer in the center of people's minds. It's likely that many didn't even hear about this new development, even people in Adelaide. Carol's evidence really is the only reliable piece of evidence that we have in this whole case that points to a probable theory. It truly did irritate me and frustrate me to hear what a poor job the South Australian police did during this initial investigation. And it really does make me wonder if there is anything else that they missed. And let's face it, if Carol had not come forward, we probably would have never heard of what she did witness that morning, which I think was very likely Daniel's abduction. So if what Carol witnessed was indeed Daniel's abduction, it backs up the theory that the Sheppard family have pretty much believed all along, that Daniel was taken by strangers against his will. They have also considered several other strong possibilities over the years, including the possibility that Daniel was taken by sexual predators. They have even contemplated if his case might have been connected to two other well-known South Australian cases, the Snowtown murders, often called the bodies in the barrels, and the family murders. However, Snowtown can be ruled out as Daniel's remains were never found during the investigation, but it certainly is in the realm of possibility that the family were involved in Daniel's disappearance. So if you are unfamiliar with the family murders, let me give you a quick rundown. The family was a group of people that kidnapped, tortured and sexually abused boys and young men during the 70s and 80s, so a bit before Daniel's time. They did murder 5 of their victims that we know of, but only one person was ever arrested in relation to this case, and that is Bevan Spencer Von Iam. And he was only convicted of one of these 5 murders. That was 15-year-old Richard Kelvin. The rest of the murders, for all intents and purposes, remain unsolved, as no other arrests have ever been made despite an ongoing investigation. I'm not sure if it's still ongoing, but it has been active in recent years. And this means that the family are still at large. So what are the chances that they were still active during the 1990s? After all, it's not like serial killers haven't come out of retirement after years and years to commit more crimes or torment or torture the police. For example, BTK came out of retirement somewhat after a long time just to poke fun and torment the police and the victims. And Daniel certainly does fit their typical victim profile. But other than the location matching up, I'm unsure if it really could have been the family that were involved. Given I really don't know the ins and outs of the family murders, so I don't think I can really give any solid opinion on this one, but if you have any thoughts, maybe leave them in the comments below. But in the end, the only theory that I really truly believe is that Daniel was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Daniel also had quite a small build, standing at just 165 centimeters, and he did look a bit younger than his years, potentially making him quite an easy target for a crime of opportunity. And unfortunately, it is these types of cases where the victim and the perpetrator have no real connection that are the hardest to solve. After all, where do you begin to look for answers, especially with no body, and no crime scene. Today, Daniel would be 47 years old, and as of filming this video, there are still no suspects. This really is a case relying on someone coming forward with new information, someone that heard something or saw something or knows something. There is currently a $200,000 reward for any information leading to solving this case or the recovery of Daniel's remains. And of course, if you do know anything, even if you think you may know something, I'll have the Crime Stoppers number down below as well as the family's Facebook page. But thank you so much for being here today and listening to Daniel's story. And until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe.